Right, hello, my name is Rachael Maguire. I'm the Records Manager and Data Protection Officer for the London School of Economics. I've been there for 14 years and I've come at this from a records management perspective rather than from a legal perspective like the last two speakers, though I did do a Masters in Law in this subject. So, but that's how I've moved into this. So why are we developing an information asset register? And that's what I've called this presentation. It's about developing an information asset register. And it's partially because that's the model that's been around in the UK for quite a while now. As a university, we haven't had to develop one before now because we're not covered by Crown copyright. Public bodies that were covered by Crown copyright did have to develop one of these. So it means we missed the pain about a decade ago of having to create this. I got out of the British Library just before that started. But we're now having to go through that pain, but at least we've got some examples to work from. When we were deciding to develop an information asset register, we had to consider, and this was the main driver, the GDPR Article 30 requirements, the records of processing. But we also had some internal requirements, some things that we wanted to include. And this included data license agreements. Data licenses, as a research-based university, we do a lot of research, we get a lot of secondary research data sources, and they tend to come with license agreements. So they might say that only staff and students at the school can use the data, or they might get to the point of you have to put it on a non-network PC that's completely secure. We didn't record these things except in the contracts, and they have renewal dates and they weren't recorded either. It seemed the information asset register would be a great place to record this so we wouldn't end up with sort of, oh dear, we can't use this after tomorrow because we haven't renewed it yet. Another issue we had was recording secure destruction. We use some health data at the school, and it might be a requirement that we have to put it through a degausser, so just feed the hard drive into a machine that completely scrambles it. We could put that in the information asset register as well. And the other thing, and the thing I really wanted it to do, was to improve our records management practices at the school. We had policy and guidance, like a lot of places. We got our paper records to secondary storage pretty much sorted out. But otherwise, the requirements of the GDPR have been a good way to introduce records management practice that, in my opinion, we should have been doing all along. So I'll go quickly through the Article 30 requirements. I have reproduced the entire article here, but it just helps to sort of, as I refer to it. So these are the things that we needed to consider including. Now, the first one is the name of the name and contact details of the controller. Now, the way we were thinking about the information asset register is we would list each information asset separately. So we'd probably only put the name and contact details once, say, once we've got a publishable version on the website, but we're not going to include it on every single entry that we've done. The Information Commissioner's template, which unfortunately came along after we'd already started developing it, does that. It just puts the sort of those basic details up the top and then you fill it in. But I don't think it would have worked at the school because, as Angela mentioned, we have a lot of data in a lot of different places that we need to record. The purpose of processing, well, that's pretty easy to include. We've sort of got an asset description, so this is what we're doing with it, and it's also the lawful basis, so we can record the lawful basis as set out in Article 6 and Articles 9 for special categories personal data. The next one along is the categories of data subjects and the categories of personal data And I personally think that this was actually handled better under the old regime. It's been split out a bit more in the way we've developed our information asset register, whereas what we had to do before was put a register entry with the Information Commissioner's Office, which listed the data types we were dealing with, listed who we shared it with, and it sort of collected that information together, I think, a bit better. But, I mean, it'll depend on where we end up with our information asset register. So the categories of recipients to the personal data, again, I think that was handled better by the old register entry, but we are recording those. Where applicable, transfers of personal data to a third country or an international organisation. This is something we've had to include. We have an area within it, which I'll go through in a bit, which lists who we share personal data with, and we can include that in there. Where possible, the envisaged time limits for erasure. Now, I think that the fifth data protection principle, the timeliness principle, which says that we only keep data for a certain period of time, this is less than a where possible. I think it's a requirement. It's something we should have to do, and we have included retention periods and retention triggers in our information asset register. And where possible, a general description of the technical and organisational security measures. Again, you know, I mean, we've been hearing all through today, the technical and security measures are important. You've got to get your technical and security measures in place, and you've got to record them somewhere. I think where possible is making it a little bit more voluntary than it actually needs to be. So how do we go about creating our information asset register? Well, the first thing I did, and I do love acronyms, so you've got another one on this page. TNA stands for the National Archives, who are the old Public Record Office. They're the people who contain the archives for the UK. So they've got a lot of guidance on records management and how to manage electronic records, and that included developing the information asset registers. But the next thing we also looked at was other examples. There's National Archives has a template. We also looked at the Department of Transport's Information Asset Register and the template provided to NHS organisations. As I said, we have health data. We wanted to make sure we were aligned with theirs so that we didn't sort of end up not recording something we might have to if we had to operate under the NHS IG toolkit. So the next thing we did, we started looking through, you know, are those particular fields useful to us? Some of them we discarded. Others we thought, actually, no, that would be useful. For example, make and model if a data set is on a particular device. And then we went about developing the specification. I did the first draft. The Information Security Manager and the Schools Archivist went through it as well. And we started to decide on what we were actually going to label the different fields. So, for example, the TNA template had a what does it do for an information asset. We decided to call it a much more sort of asset description, much briefer. So we then started to group them together. We got our file names and we sort of decided on how many fields we needed. So, for example, we ended up with one personal data field rather than one for personal and special categories. We added the specification to an updated records management policy, which is renamed the Information Asset and Records Management Policy because I didn't want to have to write two of them. So that got passed by our senior managers. So this is what our information asset register contains, and they're grouped in this way. You've got your core fields, so things that are fairly simple. Name, owner, description, retention, the sort of basic stuff. Then there's the information security fields, things like access, our information security classification. It was hard to apply before. Now we've got a place to put it. And other security measures. The business continuity fields cover things like risks to the asset, support contacts, and backup. They're the things that will determine whether we can make sure the asset is available when we need it. Then there are the data protection fields, fairly basic, what sort of personal data, personal special categories both, what the lawful basis is, and are there any data processes, so we can make sure that we've got the right contracts in place there. Publication fields, is it published, and if so, where? And the data license agreements, and we created those from the contracts themselves, so it's things like restrictions of use and renewal date. One question we have wrestled with is coverage. We developed another checklist for systems because the systems managers wanted that to ensure that they could apply the data portability and that sort of thing to their systems. But we ended up with another form with information. So we do want to include the systems data within the information asset register. I want a full picture, but it's how we bring all that together in the end is going to be a question. Okay, this may not look, I was trying to make it as big as possible so you could see it, but this is sort of some of the actual information asset register with one of the examples, which is the data protection case files. And as we were developing the template, we included two examples in there, both an unstructured set of information like the data protection case files and also a structured database, the governor's database. Okay, so that was the fun part. The less fun part was getting it filled out. This had to be done by the staff themselves. It wasn't something we could do for them. They're the ones closest to the information asset. They have to provide the information. So we provided the template. We provided some guidance. We sat down with them and went through the template with them, category by category. Our original target was to finish by the end of January. There was some slippage, mainly towards the end of March, but I know some of the entries were still coming back when I checked my emails this morning. We have had an issue with the quality of responses, particularly around the size of the information asset. That was a hard one, and it can be a hard one to grasp. The retention periods, people just didn't know how to apply them. Also the, I've lost my space, lawful basis. Even though I provided something to them which had the likely personal data types they would hold and the likely lawful basis that went through them, so all they needed to do was copy across. However, and they are finding out about that this week. We are planning to do workshops with them. We're going to go through their information asset registers. We're going to go through the retention schedule. And if they haven't filled something in, by the end of those sessions, it will be filled in. We want this to be a living document. It isn't just something that's done, put to one side and never gets used again. We want this to be something people can work from. But we still haven't tackled research data yet. We've done staff data, student data, alumni, the more administrative stuff. It's easier to work, I don't know if Anjali finds this, it's easier to work with administrative staff in universities to get these things done. Academic staff can be a very hard audience to get hold of. So we're aiming to develop an information asset register light version, and we'll test it with some friendly researchers before we let it loose on the school. And I have a feeling it's going to be the same, just having to work through people, sitting down with them until we finally get at least some of the returns back. So what are our next steps? And I think what I've been hearing around this morning is, you know, like most of us, we don't want to lose the momentum that we've had up to this point. We want to be able to keep it going and make sure that we can embed the data protection practices we need to. So while we haven't got everything sorted out yet, we've made a start and we have at least got some of these things done. So our next decisions will be around where are we keeping the data we've gathered. We've got the information asset register entries, we've got the systems checklists, we've got cloud assurance questionnaires, which our information security team got filled out. So there's a lot of data. We need to get it together in one place and manage it properly. So at the moment it's mainly in spreadsheets or in forms. We might decide to put it in SharePoint. We might decide to put it into a proprietary database. So that's something we do have to consider. And I'm looking forward to that. The next thing is, how are we going to keep it updated? And that is going to be something I really am not sure of at this point in time. The National Archives suggests doing this on a yearly basis, but I think trying to sort of, with all of the other things that universities are having to face at the moment, and there are changes in the regulators, there are other things that we do have to consider. We don't want to make the burden on people too hard, but we've also got to make sure that we're keeping this accurate. I think we're going to have a moratorium on data. So over the next couple of years, just declare what you've got, even if you haven't managed to do it by now. It's better that you declare it at some point than you don't declare it at all. But my final thoughts, I do speak quickly, sorry about that, is that as a records manager who's moved into the information rights area, this has been one of the first times that records management has got direct support from legislation. Even the Freedom of Information Act, which comes with a code of practice in records management, has not had the same impact that GDPR has had. And this is one of the truly good things, I think, that GDPR has given records managers as a profession. As I've said before, I'm finally doing records management and nobody can stop me. So, any questions? Oh, if you want a copy of the template, do get in touch. I'm happy to make it available to people.
Well, thank you very much. Maybe you have some questions about assets register?
Okay, thanks. Having the register, are you going to, beside the fact that you registered your assets,
Yeah.
which is a value in itself, but are you going to work with the register to improve processes, data processing activities, things like this? And if yes, since you're not, and if yes, how do you implement it in the entire process of developing to maintain and monitor your processes?
Well, monitoring processes, business processes, is not something that the school has ever done particularly well. I think around the sort of 90s and early this century, the school grew very rapidly, and people had always worked through the people they knew rather through the systems. So I think we're finally getting to the idea that yes, we actually have to have a grip on business processes, and particularly with the information asset register. We want to use it as a tool to make sure that people start, if we're saying we're keeping things for this period of time, we start only keeping them from that period of time. We see where there are information security issues. Our information security manager definitely wants to get his hands on what security people are using. So we do plan on making this a tool that we can use to make records management and other business processes better. Yet we know people are keeping HR data all over the school, and it's mainly because they don't trust HR systems. If to a degree, just having the fact that people are keeping their local copies of HR data will show that there is that major problem there and something needs to be done about it.
I have a question. But you mentioned that asset management should be done on a separate computer out of the network somewhere in a basement or whatever.
Depending on the data set, yes.
Okay, can you please like list which assets you mentioned when you say that they should stay interactive or alive, as you like previously mentioned?
It's basically our library doesn't just hold books, it holds a lot of research data sets as well. Being a social sciences university, we do a lot of just merging big data, getting data sets together, interrogating those data sets in order to do the research. And it's generally at that point we're going to have those differences as to whether something can be made completely free and to all staff and students, whether it can be made available to other people at the library, or whether it's only staff and students, or whether, like I said, we've actually got 2 rooms now in the library which are completely locked down, where the data set can be put on it and processed. One of them is German census data, for example, which has a lot of strictures around it because of historical reasons. So if you want to work on it, it has to be a single computer without a network access, so that you can't download it, you can only work on it while you're there, take the sort of anonymised data and work on it, work on that anonymised data afterwards.
Okay, any more questions? No. Maybe I will ask you one question. So, what about this updating of this register? Who is responsible, and is it like a signature of organization? Who can say that this is the version, actual version of this paper?
Right, okay. Well, I'll go back to that. This particular column here, owner, who is responsible for the information asset? In many ways, it's that person, and in this example, it's my name, but other people have been using a sort of staff role because the person might change within that role. So they are ultimately responsible for that information asset. I'm ultimately responsible for the data protection case files. Keeping it up to date generally all over the school will probably be one of my tasks, and it will just be a case of, okay, this time of the year, this is your register entry, tell me if it's still correct, in which case fine. Otherwise, if you've got new data, put it on. Or we can discuss what you've got if you've destroyed data. I mean, one of the things we've got is whether the data collection is ongoing or ceased. If it's ceased, you change it to ceased. It's if you're still holding it. So I think it's, like I say, I think it's likely to be a yearly thing that we end up doing. But it's going to be, this is what you told us last time. Is it still true? If not, update it. And then there'll be the chasing, because there is always chasing.
Okay, then thank you very much. If no questions, I give you certificate and a small present. And I think we have a coffee break, no? It's true? Yeah.